Muscle cars didn't die because Americans stopped loving power. They died because America got scared. Scared of oil, scared of lawsuits, scared of pollution, scared of losing control. And once fear entered the room, horsepower was the first thing to get strangled. That's the part nobody tells you. Because the story you usually hear is simple. Gas crisis killed muscle cars. That's not wrong. But it's not the truth either. The real story is way messier and way more human. Stick with this. Because by the end, you'll realize muscle cars didn't disappear. They were pushed out. And the reasons feel uncomfortably familiar today. Picture a warm summer night in 1969. Somewhere outside Detroit. Or maybe a strip of road in Southern California. The sound hits first. A deep, angry rumble. A big block, V8 shaking the ground. People turn their heads before they see anything. Then it rolls by. A Charger. A Chevelle SS. A Mustang Mach-E. Long hood. Wide stance. No apology. Muscle cars weren't subtle. They weren't polite. They weren't cheap power for regular people. And that's why they mattered. You didn't need to be rich. You didn't need connections. You just needed enough money, a good credit signature, and bad judgment. Muscle cars gave everyday Americans access to something that felt rebellious: speed, freedom, control. In the late 1960s, Detroit was in an arms race. Who could build the fastest car? Who could stuff the biggest engine into the smallest body? Horsepower numbers climbed like a scoreboard. 300, 301, 302, then 425, then 450. Insurance companies started sweating, but buyers didn't care. They were young, confident, and America felt invincible. Factories were strong. Gas was cheap. Highways were empty. Nobody thought about consequences. That's important. Because muscle cars were born in a moment where limits didn't exist. Then the limits arrived all at once. In the early 1970s, the world shifted. Gas prices spiked. Oil suddenly felt political. Lines formed at stations. People argued over gallons. Suddenly, driving wasn't carefree anymore. It was stressful, and muscle cars became symbols of excess. At the same time, something else happened. The government stepped in. Emissions regulations, safety standards, new rules that changed how engines could be built. Horsepower dropped. Compression ratios fell. Engines were detuned. Cars that once terrified tires now struggled to scare anyone. And enthusiasts felt betrayed. But regulations weren't the only problem. Insurance companies saw muscle cars as rolling lawsuits. Young drivers, big engines, bad outcomes, premiums skyrocketed. Owning a muscle car suddenly meant paying twice. Once at the dealership, once every month. That alone killed demand faster than any regulation. Parents told their kids no. Buyers hesitated. Sales dropped. Detroit panicked, and panic makes companies do dumb things. Manufacturers tried to adapt. They slapped stripes on weaker cars, added spoilers to engines that couldn't back it up. Performance became cosmetic. The soul drained out quietly. Now, here's where the story gets deeper. Muscle cars didn't just lose power. They lost purpose. In the 1960s, muscle cars made sense. America was young, optimistic, aggressive. By the mid-1970s, America was tired. Vietnam had changed the mood. Trust in institutions cracked. People wanted reliability, efficiency, peace of mind. Japanese cars showed up with exactly that. Small, efficient, reliable. They weren't exciting, but they were calm. And calm felt good. Muscle cars felt like noise from another era. Detroit didn't know how to respond. They were built for power, not restraint. The same companies that once bragged about cubic inches now advertised miles per gallon. That identity flip was brutal. Now imagine being a muscle car fan in 1975. You remember what these cars used to be. You test drive a new one, and it feels hollow. That disappointment cut deep. Because muscle cars weren't just machines. They were emotional contracts. And Detroit broke the contract. Here's the challenge. Muscle cars depended on loopholes. Loopholes in fuel prices. Loopholes in regulation. Loopholes in insurance math. Once those loopholes closed, the formula collapsed. But instead of owning that reality, manufacturers tried to pretend muscle cars still existed. They didn't. Not really. By the late 1970s, muscle cars were gone in spirit. The names remained. Camaro, Mustang, Challenger. But the engines were shadows of their former selves. The magic was gone. Then something interesting happened. Muscle cars became legends. Not current products. Myths. Stories told by older guys at gas stations. Bench racing replaced real racing. The cars grew in memory while shrinking in reality. That nostalgia mattered. Because it kept the idea alive, even when the market didn't support it. In the 1980s, performance returned slowly. Technology improved, fuel injection, better materials. But muscle cars didn't come back fully, because something else had changed. Society. Speed became regulated. Cameras everywhere. Tickets easier. Risk less tolerated. Driving fast stopped being romantic, became irresponsible. That cultural shift hurt muscle cars more than any law. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Safety. In the muscle car era, safety was optional. No airbags. Minimal crash protection. Just steel and hope. As safety standards increased, weight increased. Complexity increased. Costs increased. You couldn't build a cheap, simple, brutally powerful car anymore. Not without compromise. And muscle cars were built on simplicity. That was the problem. So by the 1990s, muscle cars existed in a weird space. They were no longer mainstream. They were niche. Enthusiast toys. Weekend machines, and Detroit treated them that way. Limited runs. Special editions. High prices. The opposite of what muscle cars were meant to be. Originally, muscle cars were accessible. Now they were exclusive. That's not evolution. That's retreat. Here's where things get misunderstood. People say muscle cars died. They didn't. They were put into a box. A nostalgia box. Manufacturers learned something painful. Muscle cars were great for branding. Terrible for regulation-heavy reality. So they leaned into image instead of volume. That's why modern muscle cars look aggressive but sell in smaller numbers. Now, let's explore the emotional side. Muscle cars represented rebellion without consequence. That's a dangerous combination. As America matured, consequences mattered more. Environmental impact, public safety, energy dependence. Muscle cars became symbols of irresponsibility to people who never loved them. That created pressure, political pressure, cultural pressure. And companies respond to pressure by playing safe. Safe doesn't make legends. That's the conflict. Now here's the turning point people miss. Muscle cars didn't die in the 1970s. They died when manufacturers stopped believing they could be everyday cars. Once they became special, the war was over. Muscle cars were never supposed to be special. They were supposed to be common, loud, annoying, everywhere. When they became rare, they lost their teeth. Technology eventually allowed performance to return. Modern engines make insane power. Cars today are faster than anything from the 1960s, but the experience is different. Filtered, managed, controlled. You don't fight the car anymore. The computer does. That's progress, but it's not muscle. Muscle cars were raw, imperfect, a little dangerous. And that's why people love them. Here's the climax. The truth behind the death of muscle cars in America isn't oil or regulations or insurance. It's that muscle cars belong to a moment in history where freedom mattered more than efficiency, where emotion mattered more than optimization. When America changed, muscle cars didn't fit anymore. They didn't die because they failed. They died because the world they were built for disappeared. That's the part that hurts, and that's why they still haunt people. Because muscle cars remind us of a version of America that didn't ask permission, that didn't apologize, that didn't optimize everything into boredom. Today, muscle cars exist again. Technically, they're faster, safer, smarter. But they're also on borrowed time, electric future, tighter rules, new values. The cycle is repeating, which makes this story more relevant than ever. Because the death of muscle cars isn't really about cars. It's about what a culture chooses to protect and what it's willing to let go. If you want to see how one modern car is quietly becoming the last true muscle car, watch the next video on your screen. Subscribe for more deep automotive and cultural history. And comment below whether muscle cars should have evolved or stayed wild forever.